The broadcast is live. It's Dan McCormick. It's Wisdom Wednesday. It is the greatest salesman podcast going around the world. We're live on Facebook and YouTube. We'll look forward to your comments. We'll look forward to your questions. We'll look forward to you sharing and liking the page. We have had an amazing journey. And if you're new to the greatest salesman, on behalf of the Augmandino Company, my name is Dan McCormick, the ambassador for the Augmandino Company. This little gem right here landed in my hands when I was 19 years of age. As a young man with no self-esteem, no self-worth, no net worth, I was challenged to do something I wasn't very good at, and that was read and study a book that I would soon realize that 7 years later had a profound impact on my journey. And each and every week, I get to find the greatest salespeople in the world. And so I had this clever little caption for my guest today. I simply said, we're going to have today's guest be the greatest salesperson in the world, and we're going to prove it, Lisa. We're going to
prove it. Okay.
Because she is Lisa Grossman in Arkansas today. Welcome to the podcast. How are you, Lisa?
I'm awesome and so excited to be here, Dan. It's kind of a bucket moment for me to be talking with you on like the same stage, so to speak.
Well, what's interesting is when I called you last month, I know you said, Augmandino, I love Augmandino, and that's really the case. But before we get to how we know each other, how you learned about me learned about you, I see you live all the time. Every time I pop on your broadcasts around the globe. But what I love from a value perspective, for all of our listeners that might hear it today live, that might hear it in 6 weeks or 6 years, I would love it if you could give me like 3 things that have shaped your life or each and every day. What are three things that you think shape you being what I call the greatest salesperson in the world today?
It's evolved, but at 58, you look at the world a little bit differently. But I would say number one, approach the day with gratitude.
Ooh.
I start every day and I end every day with gratitude, because if you aren't grateful for where you're at, you're going to be pointed in the wrong direction when you start to go somewhere. So if you're not grateful, it's best to stand still, because you will absolutely move in the wrong direction if you start moving.
Love that.
The second I would say is that always look at the long picture, the long game, the horizon. So many people think that everything that happens is like a one-page open, close, finish type of thing, and they build their life accordingly. And I think long-term vision is what propels us. And if you spend too much time doing short-term thinking, the long-term vision disappears. You can't even find it.
Wow.
And the third thing that I would say is to remember that in life, no matter where you are, you can't solve every problem alone, but you always have an army of people either that you know, or that you can find in books, or that you can find in teachings. There's always more information out there. There's always a way to get to a solution, and there's always somebody who's been there before or somewhere similar before, that if you hold your breath and look for it, you can find guidance. There's always guides around you.
Wow. I say this each and every week, because when we go live, every week someone's given thought to those 3 things. I'm astounded every week how the principles that guide people's lives are unique to them in their journey, and they're just so real. I mean, I can really feel what you're saying there. Almost thought you were speaking from Wally Waddle's book when he talked about in chapter 7 about gratitude. You can never go beyond where you currently are until you're grateful for what you currently have. I really love that.
That's so true. And have you also noticed, unfortunately today, people don't utilize language to its full breadth, because there's so many different words. So people often think they're angry when they're just frustrated. But have you noticed that it's impossible to be angry if you're grateful?
Wow.
And anger, I don't like anger. So I prefer gratitude and I can be perturbed or annoyed, but I very seldomly get angry.
Yeah. I agree with you on that. And and always looking at the long game. Nobody's ever mentioned that, but it's interesting that if you really study Og and the greatest salesman in the world, and you think about how he laid those scrolls out for us, it really is a long game. It's a lifelong journey game. And so that paradigm was just beautiful.
It's because so many people want to treat their life like a game of checkers, and Og Mandino was a chess master and a world-class chess master. And the long game is where everything reveals and manifests and comes out. And it's so funny because the title of the book is The Greatest Salesman in the World. And he is, but I always thought of him as the greatest businessman in the world because he gave you advice to get through the day, but it was really a parable to get through life.
Oh, man, that is so well said. And then, it's interesting because in my morning reading today, the word remember came up over and over and over. And you just said, remember. And Og was very famous for saying that there's 3 words you need to remember. And that is, I need help. If you are not getting answers to what you need, just say, I need help. And there's people out there, if you'll ask. So those are 3 marvelous things. I hope people are taking notes on that. If you're live with us today on the Greatest Salesman podcast, we're talking with Lisa Grossman. She's the greatest salesperson in the world today, joining me. When I reached out to you and you said Og Mandino, oh my gosh, I love Og Mandino. Let's talk about because when I reached out to you again last month, I remember you were in a conference, I believe, with Tony Robbins.
And it's interesting because I just finished another one with Tony Robbins.
Yeah.
And it's amazing when you have shifts externally. A lot of people think the external world is what drives them, and it really isn't. But shifts in what's going on externally cause you to take pause and make shifts internally. And I realize we get so busy being successful through other people's eyes that sometimes we forget to go get better and to go plug into the things that help us, remind us, make us think, look at things differently. And so I found Tony again. Tony and I have had almost as long a journey together as Og and I, but not quite.
Wow. Yeah, of course. He's a student of Jim Rohn and a remarkable teacher. But I wonder, I know when I was 19 years of age and I'm just starting network marketing, I'm in direct selling, and there's Kathy Benson. We had Blanca chime in. We've got other people. Ed, how are you today? The windy and hot city. It's great to have our guests wherever you may be chiming in from. Feel free to comment. I just love what Lisa has set us up with here for the next few minutes to talk about these 3 things. I was 19 years old. I didn't like reading. I didn't like learning. I didn't know how to study. And I really was not anything other than anxious for financial success. And when the individual put this hand at the very first network marketing meeting I went to, standing in the parking lot, and he said, this changed his life. I remember where I was. I don't know if you have any of those recollections of where you were. How early?
I do. But what's interesting is our perspectives are different.
Yeah.
I love to read, but because of it, I'm very demanding of my authors. And The Greatest Salesman in the World was not the first book that was recommended to me. And it was on a list. But of course, I think the book that everybody goes and reads first is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Yeah. Great information. But I wasn't in love with the book because I felt like I was reading other people's stories and I didn't really relate to his style. And then the next book I read was very informational. When I fell in love with The Greatest Salesman in the World was because it spoke to me because it wasn't so technique driven. He tells you how to live, and they turn out to be marvelous techniques and a blueprint for living well, which translates itself incredibly well into business. Because I'm not saying that all those other authors weren't authentic. I think their focus was so much on telling you how to do it and how other people thought before they did it. It never really resonated with me to the point as just, I could use this book to be the greatest salesman in the whole world. I could use it to be the greatest person in the whole world. And I think if you try hard to be the greatest person in the whole world, you will become a great salesman.
Wow. I'm just moved by that because I had the same exact feeling. It was my first book, by the way.
I know. And I'm saying, but you didn't love to read, so it turned you on to reading. For me, it had to be that good to really make me turn it into basically a diary for living, which is what it became.
Totally. And like you, when I read Think and Grow Rich, it didn't resonate with the techniques, but the principles of Og and the storytelling, how it just weaved in life story principles. And so Og says in the beginning of the book, he says, only principles endure. And so when we think about those principles, and he writes in that very first scroll, today I begin a new life. I've actually, whenever I do the podcast, Lisa, I have the hard copy, each one of the scrolls right here in cardstock. And so scroll number one.
By the way, that's a note. I'm going to take that note because I'm going to do that.
Yeah, I just love having these right here. So today I begin a new life. That's a principle for Og coming from alcoholism. I will greet this day with love in my heart. Scroll number 2, obviously just a gem. You mentioned in the pre-conference, I will persist until I succeed. And last week we were talking about, I will laugh at the world. I mean, there's so many amazing principles.
Well, what he's saying there, I mean, character is character, but actions and attributes, decisions, everybody will ask people 116 times, what's the most important thing? And we usually start with belief, but I've always thought it was persistence and consistency, because even if you believe terrible things, if you're not persistent in your pursuit of terrible, you're not going to get terrible any better more than you're going to get wonderful. You have to go out and just keep knocking on the door, and the universe will open up for you. And he said that. And that's what I loved. It wasn't like how to influence people or how to get in their head. It was basically be you. And if and strive to be the best version of yourself, because with it, everything else will show up.
Beautiful paradigm right there. If you're joining us late, I'm Dan McCormick, host of the Greatest Salesman podcast. If you are new to the Greatest Salesman, our sponsor is the Og Mandino Company. I'll get our producer to put it up on the screen here. If you want to align your thoughts, it's totally free. It's done online in a matter of minutes. Do you want to measure your thoughts? Literally in a matter of minutes, you can take our online assessment. It's called habitfinder.com. What you're going to do is go to habitfinder.com/act now. There it is right there. And you literally can just measure your thoughts. Are they aligned with what Og is teaching in the principles? And so you'll literally be able to take that assessment in a matter of minutes, be able to look at your internal world, your dialogue you're having with yourself, and maybe even find out how you feel about money, how you feel about relationships, how you feel about people. I remember the first time I took the assessment, and Dave Blanchard called me, Lisa, and he says, how do you feel when you're looking at a room? You're standing in an audience. And he said, do you see green lights or red lights? And I immediately shifted towards, that is my strength. I can see the people in the room that are nodding their heads with me, that are with me, that are ready to take the opportunity. And so I wonder if, I think you may have taken the assessment many years ago, or some time ago, but it is a fascinating thing when you can take an assessment and align your thoughts with it.
I'm going to take it again. And here's a reason that I think a lot of people should really take these things seriously. About 3 or 4 months ago, somebody asked me, superpower is big now. What's your superpower?
Right.
And I really did not, I know what I think I'm good at, but I had seen somewhere, not nearly as good, but I had seen somewhere, find your strength or find your number one superpower. So I went through this test, and what was so fascinating to me was it came back with a word that I would have never described as either a habit or a superpower. So it would have never, if you gave me, make a list of 100 and pick one, it wouldn't have made either list. And what's interesting is it's both, because it said my superpower is perspective. Now, where would you ever think perspective is a habit or perspective is a superpower? But it actually is true. Because I think my greatest strength is much like what you just said. I have an ability to take a step back and see the big picture, which gives me a perspective that often my audience or people that I'm talking with doesn't. And when you have that ability to zone in on where somebody's really at and where they really want to go versus who wants to make money, and 100 out of 100 people raise their hands, and now what do you do?
Totally. It's interesting because you have traveled the world far more. I've been around the world like you, but you've done it far more extensively. And I oftentimes see you, before these world changes hit us, I see you in Matter of fact, I just saw you on Facebook the other day celebrating a couple of years ago when you were over in Asia somewhere, I think.
I came back on January 25th for 3 weeks to do a tour, and I'm still here. And what's so fascinating about it is somebody asked me the other day, this is the first time in 5 years, except when Steve was having some surgery, that I have gone longer than 3 weeks without being on an airplane and longer than 6 weeks without being on an international flight.
Wow, that's some type of recollection.
220,000 miles a year on one world, go.
Wow.
You know the funniest? I don't miss it.
Yeah. So talk about that journey. How long have you been in the direct selling world?
Let's see. November will be 32 years.
Wow. Okay, and so you heard an audio cassette from me, you said. Was that?
Do you remember you did a series of tapes?
Yeah.
And Brian was very young when we hooked up because he's younger than me. I was maybe in the space, maybe a year, 2 years. So he would have had to be 19, 20 years old. I think he was working then. And I said, I know business. This isn't like any business I've ever done. I respected that it was a business, but I couldn't figure it out. I said, I'm tired. Same thing. You were like my Og Mandino. Everything I was hearing was how to sell. Well, if you come from business, you've got a good idea of how to do sales and marketing. I wanted to understand the business, and to understand that in this business, you have to have an understanding of people and not how to sell them, because it's easy to sell if you're a good salesperson, but how to find out what they want. Because if you can match what you're selling or sharing or educating to what they actually want, then you get a type of enrollment and buy-in that you don't get just because somebody bought something. So my initial foray into network marketing, I was all hat and no cattle. I had an amazing front line and no downline because I could sell no problem. I just was selling the wrong thing.
Wow, amazing. So I always look at my highlights in the beginning of The Greatest Salesman, and he says, "You've mastered the art of living, not for yourself alone." So you went from having a great front line, and now you've got thousands and tens of thousands of people. You've been a pioneer in the keto weight loss field for how many years now?
Well, I don't know that I'm a pioneer because I waited 2 years before I was involved with the company. Having said that, because I was retired from the field, doing lots of other stuff.
Right.
But so 3 years, but I've been involved in the ketosis revolution back in the days before they knew about fats, when Robert Lynn wrote The Last Chance Diet out of the Cooper Clinic. That's the business my family was in. But what's interesting is I'm not keto. I do intermittent fasting and low carb, and we're having great success. But my new revelation after 100 years is that diets don't work. Changing your lifestyle works, and which brings me back to something that came from this book. So many people are dieting because they don't like the way they look, and it's temporary. They go on diets. I can't wait till this diet's over so I can X. So they arrest behavior, but they don't change behavior. And all great change comes through changing of habits, which is when you replace one for another. So I think that if people stopped chasing diets and they started chasing health, finding the best tools, supplements, training for their mind, body, and spirit, that they would all be healthy, because I've never met anybody who there's no such thing as healthy obesity.
Interesting. Wow. So how much does that play a role in the mind?
I think it's all in the mind. And I say that because obviously we have to make a lot of changes with the way we eat, how often we eat. But at the end of the day, willpower is never enough to do anything, because you have to change the picture that you see. Because every day, and this is what I think I mean by the long game, and really goes back to Og Mandino, one of my favorites. I'm going to say it wrong, Dan, so you're going to have to help me. But basically, he said that your life ends up being, or you are become the sum of your experiences, or the sum of your actions, or what you do on a daily basis. And I think that's true. And what happens is people will say, we get on stage, and we don't do it to impress people, just to validate what's possible. And they see your house or all the things you've been able to accumulate in a very long career with a lot of time put in. And they'll say, gee, I want that. I would love to have a house on the hill. And maybe they would. But if somebody's only lived in a 2-bedroom apartment their entire life, and there's nothing wrong with that, they can no more see themselves living in your house next week, which is usually their attention span, than you could when you started. Because I didn't think I'd end up where I ended up. It certainly wasn't where I started to go. And so I think that you have to just you have to commit to the vision of what you're creating. And I think people have to see what they want their life to look like to have the pull to make the habitual changes. Because if it's just willpower, you're not going to quit smoking from willpower, because smoking makes you happy today and you might die many years from now. That's not reality. Or I want to make a lot of money today, but in order to do that, I have to get up. I have to show up. I have to show up for the training. I have to show up for the event. I have to keep making the phone calls. That's uncomfortable, and I'm not that uncomfortable where I'm at. So I think it all starts in your mind, and that you have a very clear vision, which you're allowed to change over time or grow, and that you commit to it. And because that becomes the guidepost every day that gets you to survive the day when the day isn't good. And I don't know about you, but 26 days out of every month are and 4 of them remind me how wonderful it is to be alive and how wonderful it is to have the privilege and honor to get to do what I do.
Yeah, that is just so true. I mean, that's like the old adage: you can't live life in crescendo every day. There's going to be some plateaus, but I think it's fascinating that you've stayed involved, interested, engaged. You've made. I mean, when you recommit to a Tony Robbins curriculum or to a Greatest Salesman curriculum or a Napoleon Hill curriculum, any of that, I mean, 32 years later, you're still on the journey of learning. That's fascinating. Where does that drive come from, do you think?
I think one of the things that I realized early on, it's interesting. I've interviewed a lot of people that have done very well or had conversations with, and I'm a natural interviewer as you are, because I'm always wanting to learn. Yeah. Many, many, many successful people. And I saw themes come out. And one of them that really always struck me is that when you decide to go after something that is interdependent in your life, like something that's going to create a team and people to embrace your vision, if you're not committing for every day the rest of your life to be both a teacher and a student, you don't understand what you just decided to do. So I've always been committed to learning, because there are always people that are following you that expect you to know more than you did yesterday. And you have to, because they're striving. But I love learning. I love knowledge. I love new ways of looking at things. I think what it stems from is, if you get me down at my core, I love to solve problems.
Interesting.
I just really, I like puzzles, I think would be a better way to put it. I love puzzles.
Interesting. Wow. Fascinating. So as I look at your 3 things here, as we kind of wind up, I love the approach to the day with gratitude. I love looking at the long game. That is really great. Especially, you just validated that principle by saying, hey, 26 days out of the month, but hey, maybe 3 or 4 days a month, we're living life in crescendo, right? We're celebrating new accomplishments, rank advancements, pin titles, trips won, commission checks, new houses, cars, whatever people might be doing for themselves or their community. And then to remember that you're not in it alone. I think those are really invaluable things. So when you sit back
together, you can see how I landed in direct selling, right?
Yeah.
Because all 3 of those can be met really well here.
And you have an interesting paradigm, because you've been both on the corporate side and on the distributor side. You've been inside companies and on the outside working with the field. So I can see where you like that problem solving. That's good stuff. That's great stuff. So, well, what would you say for someone that might be just starting today? I mean, obviously, I tell them about the first book I ever read, but what do you say to somebody that's just starting? Maybe they're not going to hear it live today like we're live. Maybe they're going to hear it in a month, 6 months, 6 years from now. Maybe they might hear us on some podcast site. But
the first thing I would say to somebody, very first thing, is congratulations.
Yeah.
If you've truly made a decision to get up out of your chair and go change your life, or by committing to help others change theirs, you have just set yourself apart from about 95% of the people that will sit in the chair forever whining about what happened to their life. And the second thing I would say to them is, always remember and never forget, it's never as serious. Don't ever take yourself too seriously. On the flip side, take everybody you meet seriously, whether they get into your business or they don't get into your business, or they become a customer today or they don't become a customer today. Because at its core, too many people think that they have to, skills will develop. But first and foremost, I've committed to marrying the process. And this is what I tell everybody: marry the process, trust it, divorce the result. And always remember, we're in the choice business. There's no pressure on you. Your job every day is not to convince anybody of anything. It's not to impress people with your phenomenal story that maybe you feel you don't have yet. All it is to go out and remind people through by asking their permission that they have a choice, that wherever they're at, there are other things available to them. They have other options. And if they would like, you can connect with something that may or may not change their life. But they'll never know unless they at least take a look. And that's what I tell people. I took a look and I knew something. I want to say one thing. I don't know if it comes into play, but I know what every single person who ever got into a network marketing company, at the very minute that they decided to do it, I know what they were all thinking. Every single one across the board. They had some problem in their life that they couldn't solve, whatever it was, financial, they were burnt out, some problem. And they sat down with somebody and they got a glimmer of something, and they met some other people like Dan, people like in your upline. And they said, there's something I want, and I don't know, but I have this feeling that possibly if I get together with this group of people and this story that resonated with me, maybe I can get it done. And in that moment, they say yes. So if you always remember how you felt and why you said yes, you'll always be able to help other people connect to why they said yes. Because the number one reason people stop doing this is they stop talking because they're afraid of what other people think. What you think and why you did what you did is important. And don't let what anybody else says stop your resolve that you have the right and deserve to have the best life you can have. And that's kind of how I feel about the space.
How good is that? I mean, if you're listening, that's why she's the greatest salesperson in the world today. She's in that chair, and I get to interview her about her journey. It's really special because you mentioned a word a couple times, and it actually was an amazing book that Og wrote called The Choice. Absolutely one of my favorites. I love rereading it like every year or two. And I love how you said, marry the process and divorce the result. And that's just the consistency factor in you. I can feel that you just like showing up every day. You're excited every day to meet that next new person. And remember,
some days I show up confident. When I show up not excited, I'm confident that if I keep showing up, the excitement will reveal itself.
So good.
There are days that, what's that old thing about commitment? Doing what you said you'd do after the mood has passed. Mm-hmm. I have the, but I love Og Mandino. I just was thinking about the other books, and it is so real. I can understand why you are carrying this forward, and I'm so great that you are. Did you ever think when you read that book that you would be the person that would be holding the legacy of Og Mandino in your hands?
Well, it's interesting because when I read the book, I'm not when I'm married at 20, I'm married at 19. At 21, I think I was 20 years old, saw him speak. The only time I ever saw him speak live was in Calgary, Alberta with my wife, where she's from. And it was called Achievers Unlimited. I'll never forget it. And, you just kind of go, wow, there's just a man of wisdom. There's a man of principle. There's somebody that I want to read. I want to study. I want to be like. And he also said something that was pretty interesting in the scrolls. And that is, how much essentially can you make by just mastering one speech? And just,
it's funny because I always thought of it. My notes would say somewhere that he said, double down on what you're great at. Don't worry about what you're not great at, and then share it with as many people as you can. But he's right. One principle, well-defined, that brings clarity to an audience, that inspires them to action, will change your life more than almost anything you can ever do.
Yeah, so true. Wow. I'm so glad that we were able to connect. I know we haven't crossed paths a lot in our lifetime, but I know we're in the same.
I've been following you since I first heard your name. I mean, you're a legend.
I love chiming in when I see you go live. You're so consistent. I think that is truly probably one of my top 5 favorite words is just consistency and just trusting the process. can't thank you enough for the wisdom you've shared with our listeners today. And I certainly hope that your team will get a sense of what you're trying to teach every day. Yeah.
I want to thank you so much. It's such a privilege. This really was a bucket list moment for me. You know, you start off in this space and you're sitting in the front row taking all the notes, thinking that maybe one day you'll get on the stage, and it's like a dream that maybe one day you'll get to stand there next to the people that inspired you. And I just want to thank you for all the people in your career, in the industry, in the whole space at large. You've always been such a contributor, and you make such a difference in so many ways. You certainly did in my life and through me. I think people that I've trained, because so much of it comes back to stuff I listen to you while walking with my Walkman. That's how far back. And I really appreciate you.
Well, we're going to have to reach out to Brian and get him on the show and have him share the journey, because I remember giving him the book and talking about the book, and Brian McMullen. So thanks, Cheryl and Wendy, for your comments, and for some of the people on your team that might be listening. Jacqueline there, and all those people that shared the journey with us here today. If you have not liked the page on Facebook, please do follow it, so you'll be alerted every week, Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific time. Please feel free to share the broadcast today to one of your pages if it was of value to you. Comment, leave a review on one of our podcast sites. You can go to greatestsalesman.com, our website. You can certainly take the assessment. I'll have that put back up on the screen in closing. Feel free to align your life and your thoughts with the principles that Og left us with by taking that free assessment. About a $90 value. We give it to you for free at habitfinder.com/act now. Scroll number 9, which is why I did the hashtag act now. Don't delay or hesitate. It's only your life we're talking about here. It's only the rest of your life. So let's be active and act now. I know you want to say something.
Yeah, I do, because $90, I'm sure that's priceless.
Yeah.
I just want everybody who's listening to understand clarity is power. And if you want to have great success with other people, you have to know yourself first. And anything that can save you time, saves you money, and can help you clarify who you are and how you feel is going to make you better able to find your tribe and the people that you're going to resonate with. So I'm going to take it as soon as we get off of this.
All right.
Again.
All right.
I'm going to tell everybody to, and I would suggest that you take it right away.
Oh, man, this is great. Listen, we appreciate your time. I know you're very busy. Enjoy taking the assessment and looking and learning a little bit more about you. Thank you for all of our listeners. I'll be back next week, as we are each and every week. Unbelievable. Have the greatest day of your life, as Og would say. And you can go ahead and read the scrolls and see how many times he actually says that. Have the greatest day of your life.
Your life.
I'm Dan McCormick. She's the greatest salesperson.